Hey, so recently I've been making videos on political correctness, and I don't think what I'm going to say in this video is inconsistent with my positions in that video, or at least not a case of me doing a U-turn, because I still stand by everything I say. I still believe that political correctness is a problem for all the reasons I laid out. And I think in society we need to have the scope to offend insofar as things should not be censored solely due to sensitivity. So I stand by all that. But I thought it would be worthwhile showing the other side. That is not to play the advocate for those who think political correctness is or for those who advocate political correctness. My intention is not to play the devil's advocate for those people, but rather to say that there are some situations where um, there is such a thing as tastelessness. So, to cite an example of this, I'm going to talk about Charlie Hebdo. This is, of course, the French satirical magazine newspaper, I think they described themselves, which got worldwide fame following the attacks in Paris at the beginning of last year. Now, at the time, and very much now, I called that for what it was, an unjustified, brutal terrorist attack. There's no moral equilibrium between gunning down cartoonists and the offence that the cartoonists may have caused. No moral equilibrium whatsoever, because cold-blooded murder is infinitely worse. So that's absolutely my position. But I came across a forum earlier where there was a debate over the latest Charlie Hebdo cover, which shows Alan Kurdi. He's the young Syrian boy who became a personification of the refugee crisis last year when he washed up, drowned on a beach in, I believe it was Italy. So he kind of became the personification of the migrant crisis, and it posed a lot of soul searching and so on. So they use him as a cover, and they've suggested that he will grow up to be a rapist. This is in context of the Cologne attacks. Now, apparently, the context of doing this was that they're mocking the far right in exaggerating, as they see it, the migrant crisis. Charlie Hebdo is said to be very much left wing, very pro immigration and anti racism. That's supposed to be the political ideology from what I've heard. But my question is there not a better way to satirize the far right than by using a dead child to do so? And I do think it's tasteless. Um, it's not the first time this company, that this brand has been in hot water. After the MH370 disaster, Malaysian Airlines that went down in the Pacific, they had a depiction of a pilot with decapitated hands clutching the burnt breasts of an airline stewardess. Now, on that occasion, it was supposedly an attack on the recovery process. They have also had a pretty crude depiction of the Russian jet that was shot down over Egypt last year, which was actually last year's worst terrorist attack. So they have a track record of provocative imagery. Now, on that forum, when I was debating this, people said, "Oh, you don't understand satire." That's just the thing. I do understand satire, and I do believe there is a place for satire. But in my opinion, satire needs to be genuinely intelligent. Yes, it usually is provocative. Yes, it can be a bit tasteless. But in my opinion, Charlie Hebdo isn't particularly clever. They're more like schoolboy pranksters who basically, and or actually, they behave like schoolboy bullies who can give but can't take. Because as soon as anyone criticizes Charlie Hebdo, people are automatically like, "Oh, you're a fascist, you're a pro-Islamist, you're a purist," and it's almost what it actually is in a sense political correctness from the other side. It's political correctness in the sense that just because it's satire, just because they're cartoonists, they're somehow in this bubble above criticism. It's a bit like some journalists take this attitude when they talk about a free press. Um, I would make the argument that all free thinking, responsible adults should take responsibility for their own actions. So just because someone can use satire as an excuse, or just because you can do something, doesn't mean that you should. Now, the explanation for this, that they're attacking the far right, I just don't buy it. Maybe that is their intention, but I think it's a very lousy cover. I don't think it really sells the point at all. Um, because the far right hasn't even mentioned Kurdi. They have been attacking all migrants, but basically, there's a callousness to this. I mean, how would the father of Alan Kurdi feel about this? And regarding the flight, to use victims of a tragedy in that sort of way, I think is trash, basically. I do believe there is a place for satire, and I don't consider myself overly sensitive, but I do think we have to have some values. We have to have some sense of proportion. I don't like political correctness, but the caveat to that is I don't think people should be provocative solely for the sake of it. And I think that's what Charlie Hebdo does. I don't think they're particularly smart, actually. I've seen much better, much more intelligent satire than Charlie Hebdo. For example, in the Times newspaper. There's stuff in there that is. I think people are clouded by emotions because they know what happened to Charlie Hebdo last year. Everyone, every reasonable person agrees that was an absolute outrage. But I don't think that just because you say, oh, well, I'm a cartoonist, I can do whatever I want. I think that's a selfish sort of attitude because pretty much anyone else, if they made this sort of statement, they would be having to answer for it. Now, Charlie Hebdo, when they make satire, yes, the satire is intended to provoke, but my question would be, are they in a bubble of protection from any criticism whatsoever? I argue no, they shouldn't be. I argue that freedom of expression applies to everyone. That includes people who are critical of someone else's opinion. So, freedom of expression, and this is a point that's sometimes overlooked, should include the right to criticize others' opinion. It's different for if the people are calling for it to be taken away and to be censored. That's a different thing. But my point is, Charlie Hebdo is not above criticism, and ever since the attack, there's been this perception that they are. That's an opinion I totally reject. Um, they shouldn't be censored. They shouldn't be silenced or anything like that, and they certainly shouldn't be threatened. But I absolutely stand by the right for anyone to criticize them because criticism is also part of freedom of expression. That's the caveat to it. You cannot, publish an image that's going to be circulated thousands of times and just expect critics to shut up and accept it because everyone's entitled to their opinion. It's a bit like if I like a particular film, what right do I have to say to someone who doesn't like that film? Like I made a thing about Twilight the other day. This is an example. Um, now, I've got no right to say I was defending Twilight. I've got no right to say critics of Twilight should shut up and they can't have their opinion. So, in a sense, it's the same principle here. The idea that critics of Charlie Hebdo should shut up is a bit hypocritical when people are shouting about how Charlie Hebdo should have the freedom to say what they want. Isn't that hypocritical? So, that's a few thoughts to leave you with. I am opposed to political correctness. I do think there's times when it gets ridiculous, where people look for a reason to be offended. But there are times, I believe, that when something is tasteless, it needs to be called out. And I believe on this occasion, Charlie Hebdo has went too far. Not for the first time either.